What is the most common thing, or one of the most common things you see writers struggling with when it comes to the structure?
I think the first 10 pages, the setup is the hardest part. And it's because you need to do so many things. And you have to do all of that in a way that's engaging, because some readers will only read the first 10 pages and you're constantly rewriting it.
Hey everybody, welcome to Let's Write Scripts. I'm Micah Cratty. I'm the head of writing at Arc Studio, the best screenwriting app in the world. And now please welcome to the stage Jamie Nash. He's a screenwriter, an instructor, and the author of, among other books, the Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook. Jamie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Jamie, I wanted to ask, what is the most common thing, or one of the most common things you see writers struggling with when it comes to the structure of their scripts?
There's so many ways I could answer this question, because I think the biggest issue is not having a story structure. So they literally don't have a break into two or a midpoint. A midpoint is often missing. So the story ends up being linear, or it ends up getting rushed. The ending feels rushed. And there's other ways, like when you read a script, that you diagnose these things. Like when you read a script, you don't say it's missing a break into two. It's more like you're reading the script and you're like, what's the story about? And when it's missing those structural pieces, like the catalyst, like the break into two, questions like that come to mind. Or even when you're reading past those points and you kind of understand what the story is, it just starts being the same thing over and over again, because it doesn't have the midpoint twist that raises the stakes, or the all is lost that raises the stakes even more and pushes you into the finale. So, it's kind of a weird question. Like, what's the hardest thing about story structure? Lack of story structure is often the biggest problem I see when I see scripts that completely lack it. And then the other, I'll give a second answer because that's a lame answer. I think the hardest part, once you do understand story structure, and it doesn't seem like the hardest part, but I think the first 10 pages, the setup is the hardest part. And it's because you need to do so many things. You have to establish the character's ordinary world. You have to establish the main character's flaw. You have to show the things that need fixing in their life, like all the different things that are breaking down because of that flaw. And you have to do all of that in a way that's engaging, because some readers will only read the first 10 pages. And you have 10 pages to do all of that stuff. And oftentimes people have an opening of like the villain or the conflict, think like Jaws or something, so then you even lose 3 or 4 of your pages to that. So you have this very small space to do all this very important stuff. And also, in Save the Cat terms, the Save the Cat moment, or what I actually consider the rooting resume, the reason we're going to root for the hero. And all of that needs to happen in such a condensed space that I think it's one of the hardest parts to get right. And you're constantly rewriting it as you
go. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, the competition just for that first 10 pages, the real estate there. And one thing I've noticed is I feel like oftentimes writers are trying to do the wrong things in those 10 pages, in the sense that they think we need to know the world building, where it's like, oh, we got to set up all the rules and what everything is and all this stuff. And really a lot of that is stuff we can learn as we go. That's right. Not important up front. We don't need that exposition dump. We need to get to know these characters, get on board with them, and start them on their journey. I think that's interesting, because you were talking about the first 10 pages, and I find myself doing it in two different ways. One that's valuable and one that's not. One where I'm just kind of scared to move forward, and the other where I'm actually honing in on what it is and like crafting that opening. I feel like sometimes it can be hard to tell which one you're doing at times. Do you have any advice for like when you got that kind of beginning launched and it's time to move forward?
What I tend to do is write a very fat, loose, very bad first 50, first 25, first 30. And I constantly then go back, but I always force myself to now with me, I use Save the Cat. So I say, get to the break into two, then let's loop. And that's when I start finding the setup and payoffs, and I make it better. And I start realizing I can move that world building from here to there and stuff like that, because I have all the pieces laid out. So I'll do that for like the first 25, and then I'll go to 50 and I'll iterate through that a couple times, and not 20 times, but it might be like once or twice. Like I start from page 1 and I go through, and I keep slowly building like that. And for me, that tends to help.
Juno, working on TV series script, struggle with structuring middles, which are always the most interesting part, but the hardest to get right, I think. I feel like there is something there about middles where it's like you understand how to begin a story and you understand that a story has to end.
My advice is going to be obviously save the cat flavored. Sure. Somewhere in your fun and games, which is Act 2, essentially. The beginning of Act 2 is your fun and games. Your hero has a goal and there are obstacles in the way. So one fun way, there's a bunch, like I have a list of all these different great middles, but the most common thing about them is usually if you can think of the first kind of big victory your hero has, but then twist it and then say it's not a victory, it's a false victory. And that's one strategy to help you get there. So they kind of reach a point where they're like, they haven't won the prize yet, but they're on the path and they're feeling good about themselves. And then you twist it. Or you do the opposite, which is they get to a point and they suffer a loss, but somehow that loss isn't a bad thing. It actually opens a new opportunity. And that's another way to get to it. One of my favorites, because I read a lot of horror movies, is the monster gets unleashed around page 50, around the middle. Like you think of Alien or something like that. Usually the monster is teased. And then on page 50, it's unleashed. It's all, it's totally out there and attacking or something like that.
The picture freezes, but you're still there, Jamie?
I'm still here. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm glad you told me about that. A couple more questions from the chat. I struggle with naturalizing important exposition, how to provide important context without spelling it out for the audience. There are a couple pointers I can say. One would be, don't have your characters saying things just for the audience. That is really easy to tell when it comes across in a script, and it feels very forced, very unnatural. There are a couple of like tried and true tricks to this. One is like adding a new person, which is why in so many things there's this person who's first day on the job or something who doesn't know anything, and it's natural for them to be asking questions and needing to know this information because they are sort of the stand-in for the audience they don't know. And also putting it in some sort of a conflict, like have someone disagree with that exposition or not understand it, or have some sort of opinion on it, so that it basically the scene becomes about something else other than just getting that information across. Jamie, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, you stole my big one. I call it weaponizing your exposition. So if you can have a fight over it, or they can use it as a weapon in some ways, like, let's say it's a backstory, like, and they say, you never let me go to camp or something, instead of saying, I never went to camp. It's just it turned it into a scene. There was a trick in the Friends writer's room. They used to say every setup or every piece of exposition has to be a joke. And I've kind of always kept that to heart, is like every piece of exposition should be entertaining in some ways, or should be dramatic in some way.
Tara has a question from LA. Working on a pilot outline, usually I find the idea of the twist and drive, but finding the how execution, like he has a debt he can't pay, now figuring out what is the debt. I always go back to the character, right? Like he has a debt he can't repay. To figure out what that debt is, you have to sort of know the character. Like, what does that debt mean to them? Not only just like in their material world, like obviously they need the money for something, but like, what does the ability to repay that debt say about them? Like what are their character flaws? What do they want in the world? You have someone single dad who's like struggling to pay child support, right? Like maybe it's not about the child support, it's about proving he's a father, or proving like his own self-worth, or being the example that he didn't have to his son. You tie it into their character circumstances and their personality, their flaws, their emotions, not just the plot. Jamie, what do you think?
Yeah, again, I love that answer. I could think of two things. One is if there's a sense of irony in whatever the detail you have. So, and I actually see irony as tension. So in a log line, like liar, liar is more interesting because it's a lawyer who always lies, and he can't lie. So if you can figure out how to add an extra bit of tension juice to your concept through the debt, that's what I would always lean into. And in absence of that, the other thing I would recommend is there something you personally know a lot about? If there, anything that comes from one of your worlds, something you research, something you're passionate about studying, or something you lived, I always try to lean into that as well.
Nathan said, I was curious about the structure of individual scenes. I only realized recently that each scene has turns in the action, just like larger story chunks. Do you follow a 3-act structure in scenes? My quick answer is yes. I don't necessarily think of it as 3 acts. I think of it as beginning, middle, and end, which is sort of the same thing as saying 3 acts. But I think of it in the sense that your scene is starting for a reason. Someone is trying to get something, and that's the middle, and it ends for a reason. And so, yes, everything is an arc. You're making big arc out of little arcs all the way. It's arcs all the way. It's turtles all the way down. So I think it's really important that your scenes have a beginning, middle, and an end. They're motivated. Someone wants something. They try to get something, and they either succeed or fail. Not every scene, but most scenes, I think, can kind of fall into that kind of a pattern. Jamie, what do you have to think about the scene level structure?
The only thing I'd add to that, because I think you're dead on, is as soon as it's resolved, did they get it or didn't they get it? That's your cue to end the scene. A lot of people go on and on with that scene and with other exposition and other stuff, but that's really how you know when you can edit your scene. As soon as that's decided in the audience's mind, move on to the next thing.
How do you feel about episodic shows? So I'm guessing you're kind of talking about like procedurals, kind of case of the week shows. In the pilot, are you focusing more on the character than story, given that you're expecting a new story in each episode? I would say the first off is that what you're trying to do is establish the pattern, basically. Like these shows, I mentioned the phrase the franchise earlier, and that's kind of what you have with like a Law and Order. And what you're trying to do is like, yes, have an engaging characters, because so much of the success of these kind of shows is having like a character ensemble that you care about. But really, you're kind of establishing a pattern that then is going to be repeated, episode after episode after episode. Jamie, any advice for pilots for these kind of shows?
The one piece of advice I give, I call it blank of the week shows.
Yeah.
A lot of these are. You have to, first and foremost, it has to be one of those in an episodic. But secondly, what I found is a lot of the pilots make the first episode very personal. It's something thematic or personal, like the first case. And sometimes there's some new character arriving in a new situation, whether it's the hero first day on the job or the hero gets a partner first day on the job. And in the end, kind of the answer is, yeah, we can work together, or I can live here, or something like that. So there usually is just a little bit of movement in an episodic pilot. There's some new something.
I just recently watched the first couple episodes of that new medical drama, The Pit.
I love it.
On Max. And they do both of those things. The personal thing where we're following one main doctor, and what makes this day different than any other day is that this is the anniversary of like the death of his mentor. So it's a personal day. And 2, it's a hospital show. So you're always having new med students, new interns, new residents. And so this is a couple of those people's first day. Yes. And so that kind of also helps with the exposition. It means they can meet everyone, and so that someone can be like, oh, watch out for so-and-so, they're this. And you're like, okay, we know about this character. It gives us an excuse to bring up all these expositional kind of things.
Yeah.
Other ways you'd have to try to like cram in.
Great example.
Do you have any advice for a structure that's primarily stream of consciousness and reveals information non-chronologically, and anything to avoid becoming too confusing to follow? Jamie, how do you create structure in a movie that seems to not follow any rules of structure?
This is not really my forte. Like, I have a hard time helping out with this. The only thing I can say with something like this to organize non-chronological things, sometimes, believe it or not, biopics are hard to structure because they're just, usually you find
a life.
Yeah, it's a whole life.
Yeah.
Usually you either land on using theme as some sort of, guidance to kind of lasso it in, or you find a framing device that does have a structure and put the other stuff within the framing device, meaning like let's say Social Network, it's like there's a trial and you can kind of jump around time frames and do kind of random stuff at random times. But it's tricky. I mean,
but there's a central question kind of, and you bring the Social Network, which is like Mark Zuckerberg is being sued by his best friend, right? And it's a website about friendship, right? So you have that sort of central conflict guiding these things. Going back to the first 10 pages feature, what are some tips to introduce, tackle an ensemble cast of characters?
It really, and this is a depends question, because it
Yeah.
depends what, is it Knives Out? Is it that kind of ensemble? I'll give you one piece of advice, because there's so many different pieces of advice. Like, think of something like Game of Thrones, has all these characters and stuff like that. I think what it does a good job, I call it like handing the baton of POV. So you start with one character, you get in their POV, you realize, and then when they meet somebody, then you're free to jump to the other character's POV, and then you're free to jump to the other character's POV. And you can kind of build all the stories that way, as opposed to just jumping around randomly. It's one technique.
I'll add a couple others. This is the hard question. I'll take it on myself, Jamie. I'm not going to just
very good. Very good.
Two things I would say. One, we don't need to meet everyone all at once. We only need to meet them when we need to meet them. It's fine to just meet a couple characters and then we meet the other characters when they need to appear in the story. And a second thing, have them be doing something revealing about their character when we meet them. If it's just 10 people sitting in a room and they're just sitting there and we're meeting them all at once, and it's gonna be like, okay, this is so-and-so, this is so, like, that's going to be really hard to do. So have them be solving a problem or failing to solve a problem or accomplish a task or something like that in some sort of way that the manner in which they're doing it shows us kind of in a little nutshell who that character is.
Yeah.
Maniro asked, is there a way to learn more about script writing without having to watch movies, TV shows? I mean, the best way is read scripts. Reading scripts is the best way to learn how to write scripts. And then, of course, you can read books about screenwriting. Jamie's written a couple of them himself. And there are a lot out there. But I always say, if I'm reading a script, I can kind of tell if this person has read a lot of scripts or not, because there's just what scripts look like, the formatting, how they flow. The best teacher is imitation and then developing your own skills, I would say. Jamie, here, you can take this one. Okay. How do you feel about working on more than one script at a time? Can I write a pilot and a feature? Do you might recommend focusing on just one project?
So I've always been a multitasker. I'm usually writing things all the time, but usually the way it works, like I'll separate my time. Like in the morning, I'm most creative in the morning. So I kind of dump my creative bursts, like these sprints I do in the morning. And then at night, maybe I'm revising, maybe I'm writing an outline, maybe I'm doing something else. But usually I save my morning's very precious for me to do my dump, my muse, that kind of thing. So I'd suggest you find your time for that. And so my bigger suggestion there is I like to work on things at different stages. Like sometimes I'm working on a rewrite, sometimes I'm working on an outline, sometimes I'm working on a pitch. It's not like I'm going and doing page 10 of both things at once. That would be a little tricky for me.
Yeah. I think I would also add, it really depends on how much time you have. If you have a very busy life and you've got 45 minutes a day, then focus that 45 minutes on one project. If you have more time, then you can do it. I like, similar to Jamie, I like having kind of an A project and a B project. And if I'm waiting for notes on my A project, I kind of have a few days I can dive in to my other one. And I love what you said about having things at different stages, because it feels like you're exercising different parts of your brain. I'm not going to be like writing scenes necessarily in two things at once, because like that muscle's just too tired. But I can daydream about another project and sort of be brainstorming about it, or as I'm doing another thing. Jamie, any final words you want to say before we head off?
No, I had a great time. Also, you can also check me out at jamienash.net. You can follow what I'm up to and things like that.